live in the frontier areas. Actually, Dr. Chen herself is a Han ethnicity. As we just mentioned, Han is the majority Chinese nationalities. She converted to Islam during her college days in China, and her encounter with Hui Muslim, which is the largest Muslim ethnic group in China now, ignited her interest in history. And while in the US, she participated in interfaith dialogues seeking commonality among multiple faith traditions and promoting peace and social justice. At her current place at Guilford College, she served as a faculty advisor for Muslim Students Association, as well as a member of a Guilford campus ministry and in leadership council. So she's a very dedicated and passionate teacher, and she won Guilford prestigious award for 61 Teaching Award in 2020. In her spare time, she loved reading Chinese American literature. So with her very rich experience, and both personal and academic experience in China and USA, with her expertise on Chinese history and especially Chinese Muslims, I'm sure you will enjoy her talk today. And without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Chen Zhihong to give us a talk on Muslims in China, history, indigenization, and the challenges.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. Thanks to Brother Chai Shaojin for this very kind introduction. Thanks to the World Muslim Communities Council for giving me this honor to talk about Chinese Muslims here. Before I start, I'd like to say that Brother Chai Shaojin knows everything that I'm about to say here. He himself is a great source of knowledge and a great scholar on this topic. So I'm especially thankful that he lends this opportunity to me. Is it okay? Should I continue? Okay. I hope that our time together will be beneficial for all of us, inshallah. As Brother Chai Shaojin mentioned, I'm a convert to Islam. My official name is Zhihong Chen. My adopted Muslim name is Fatima. I'm currently teaching Asian history at Guilford College in North Carolina, USA. Today, I'm going to first share a little bit of my personal experience in becoming a Muslim in China. Then I'm going to briefly introduce the history of Chinese Muslims. And afterwards, I would like to share a couple of my thoughts on the current challenges facing Chinese Muslims. So I do have some slides to show, so bear with me for a moment. Let me open that up. So are you able to see? Okay, thank you. Oh, I'm going to move down to the next slide. It's not allowing me. Let me reshare, I'm sorry. So I think I'm going to leave the screen like this so that my computer won't freeze. You're still able to see that, right? Okay, thank you so much. So this is a map of China. Here you can see the province where I was born, Hebei province, which is in North China, close to the capital city. As some of you know, and Brother Cheshire also mentioned, over 90% of the Chinese population belong to the Han ethnic group. So I am a Han Chinese. I grew up in the mainstream Han Chinese culture and received a full official education, which was very much socialist and atheist based. In school, I was taught that religions were upside down worldviews, and they were opium that numbs people's minds and offers only illusionary solutions. So you might wonder, what about the other Chinese traditions, Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism? They were important in the pre-modern society, but in the 20th century, during China's modernization, a lot of the traditions were under attack, especially in the 1950s to 1970s, when China was engulfed in a very radical proletarian revolution. A lot of the traditions were attacked and lost. So what we had in the 1980s, 1990s was mainly a kind of a politically authorized Marxist and socialist-based ideology. What also happened in the 1990s was the deepening of China's economic reform and a more thorough embracement of the market economy. I was studying at Peking University in the mid-1990s. I clearly remember that the southern wall of the university was torn down in order to lease the space to businesses. So as commercialization came to every corner of the country, it brought great benefits to the people. As the economy soared, people's living standards greatly improved, which is a great thing. On the other hand, we know that money and corruption often go hand in hand. As many tried to make money by whatever means possible, there emerged a moral crisis in the society. Money became the new lord, and even the whole life purpose for many. So this created confusion and a lot of questions. What are our values and principles in life? Traditions have been lost, religions had been criticized, yet people still needed some kind of guidance in life. So as a college student at Peking University around this time, I certainly pondered a lot about such questions. You know, what's the purpose of life? How should I treat other people? Why do we bother to be a nice person if all we have is this deeply unequal and flawed worldly life, and if everything is based on materialistic calculations? And where is the dignity for people who are poor, who are weak, who are helpless? So without answers to these questions, I was not only confused, but also quite unhappy. It's during this time that I began to make some spiritual friends. I went to temples, I went to churches, I really explored a lot of places. And among the people that I got to know around this time were a few Chinese Muslims. They were students. My first contact with Islam occurred during a Ramadan, the fasting month. I went to visit a friend to return a book. He prepared some snacks and a drink for me, but he himself would not take any fee. When asked why, he introduced the concept of fasting and Ramadan to me. I was amazed. The idea that one would voluntarily forsake food and drink for a kind of a higher ideal, a higher purpose, sounded quite refreshing to me. So through him and his friends, I learned more about Islam. The more I learned about it, the more I was moved by its beauty and clarity. I felt that a new door was opened to me. I really like the fact that Islam is a religion that really respects humanity, in a sense that neither does it idealize nor does it demonize humans. It recognizes human weaknesses and frailties, yet it always encourages people to be better and do good. So I felt that I found answers to a lot of the questions that had bothered me. That eventually led me to take the Shahada and convert to Islam. I'm always very grateful that God has opened my heart and broadened my mind to make me see the beauty of this religion. At the same time, I have to say that being a Muslim in China is hard at times. In my own case, I lost some friends who simply could not understand why a person like me, who is from the majority Han group, who is also an educated person in a prestigious university, why would I choose a religion that is associated with minority groups in China, who were often represented as backward compared to the Han Chinese majority? So this had led to some identity struggles sometimes. Unfortunately, while losing some friends, I also gained new friends. And my family members, especially my parents and my two siblings, did not make troubles for me. In fact, they have all converted to Islam sometime later. But my experience begs the question, why are Chinese Muslims so little understood by the majority Han Chinese population, despite Islam's long history in China? So with that, I'm going to turn to the second part of my presentation today, that is to delve into the history of Muslims in China.
Chen Lao Shi, can you enlarge your screen? Make it
Enlarge my screen.
play mode.
Okay, if I try to do the slideshow, I hope it won't freeze.
Yeah, it won't.
Okay, thank you. So in fact, Islam in China has a history that is almost as old as the religion itself. Islam came to China in the 7th century AD during the Qin Dynasty. Most people believe that the earliest Muslims in China were Arab and Central Asian traders who came to China through the Silk Road. The first official Muslim delegation to China came in the year of 651 under the auspices of the third Caliph, Uthman, who dispatched Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, who is said to be a maternal uncle of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas sent a message of peace to the Chinese emperor, encouraging him to embrace Islam. The Chinese emperor did not adopt that idea, but out of respect, he did order the building of a mosque in China. That is the Memorial Mosque in the city of Canton in South China, the Huaishengsi in Chinese. It is China's first mosque. Here are pictures of the tomb of Waqqas. It's still well kept and often visited today. Those are the pictures that I took a couple years ago when I visited there. So the Tang Dynasty declined starting from the mid-8th century. When the emperor tried to put down rebellions, he called upon the Abbasid Caliph, Al-Mansur, to help him recover his capital city and suppress the rebellion. The Arab troops that assisted him remained in China, married locally and settled. So over the next centuries, more and more Muslims came to China through trade or some diplomatic missions. Islam began to take root in China. So as you all know, China has a long history. We can talk a lot of the details, but we don't have that much time. But I would like to point out one pattern that I see in terms of the history of Muslims in China. That is, to me, it seems that the more they participated in a larger Chinese society, the better they were accepted, and the more prosperous and stable they were. But once they closed off and isolated themselves from the rest of the Chinese society, they became more vulnerable to misunderstandings and xenophobic oppressions. So let's quickly look at the following history to see whether this pattern stands. After the Tang Dynasty was the Song Dynasty. In the Tang Dynasty, Muslims came, and in the Song Dynasty, they came more, and they did really quite well under the Song Dynasty. Many Muslims came to settle in China's coastal cities, such as Canton, Quanzhou, Hangzhou, and Yangzhou. They had great success in China's maritime trade. We all know that the Muslims were pretty advanced in maritime technology in the medieval time. One notable example is one Chinese Muslim in the name of Pu Shougeng. He was appointed in Chinese Quanzhou Tiju Shibo, which is an official position in charge of all foreign trade. Later, Pu Shougeng was promoted to be a provincial governor in Fujian. He was also a military general for maritime defense. As you can see, it's really not an overstatement to say that under the Song Dynasty, it's the Muslims who dominated China's maritime trade. They were doing really well. This continued into the next dynasty, which is the Yuan Dynasty, established by the Mongols. The Mongols had brought a lot more Central Asian Muslims into China and Mongolia, either by force or by invitation. For example, Kublai Khan, who is the last Han of the great Hans, invited the most talented Persian astronomer to China to help establish the Bureau of Islamic Astronomy in Nanjing. Jamal al-Din was invited to China because of his profound knowledge in astronomy. Kublai Khan also appointed another Muslim, Sayyid Ajan Shams al-Din, initially as his treasurer, but eventually as governor of the Yunnan province, which is a province in southwest China that borders with countries like Myanmar. This was also the first time that Yunnan was formally incorporated into the Chinese territory, and it's governed by a Muslim official. So here is a picture of Persian astronomers who were invited by Kublai Khan to come to China. Here is the tombstone for the Muslim governor Shamsdin in Yunnan province. As you can notice on the top, I think it's Arabic, I'm not very sure, and then with Chinese characters. That's his tomb, still visited today. So indeed, when the great Muslim traveler Ibn Battuta of Morocco visited China in the 14th century, he reported that, quote, "In every town there is a special quarter for the Muslims, inhabited solely by them. Where they have their mosques, they are honored and respected by the Chinese." So really, in the first centuries after Muslims established in China, they were doing reasonably well. They were active in trade, in politics, in other affairs, and they were accepted and quite respected. But things began to turn a little bit different as we move into the next dynasty. Here is a map of modern China. I think I was trying to show you where the Yunnan province is. It's here, southwest China. So the first century under the Ming Dynasty was fine for Muslims. In fact, the founding emperor of the Ming Dynasty, Emperor Hongwu, had a number of Muslim military generals who helped him found the Ming Dynasty. There are debates about whether Emperor Hongwu himself is a Muslim. And one thing we do know for sure, that his wife is a Chinese Muslim in the last name of Ma. We also have a great Muslim maritime explorer, Zheng He, who led multiple voyages to the Middle East and to as far as East Africa. So he was very much trusted by the Ming Emperor at his time. The Ming rulers forced Muslims to integrate. They ordered Muslims to marry outside, marry with other Chinese instead of intermarry within their own community. They encouraged Muslims to adopt the Chinese dress, to use the Chinese language. So as a result, we see a bigger integration of Muslims in the Ming Dynasty. Many took Chinese last names. So they chose last names that sounded similar to their original name. For example, a person named Muhammad might choose a last name that is pronounced as Mu or Mo. A person named Hassan might choose Ha, or Sayyid became Se. So these are still last names that are used in China even today. In the late 17th century, there was a group of Chinese Muslim scholars, such as Wang Dingyu and Liu Zhi, who devoted a lot of their energy to writing books, stressing the commonality between Islam and Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. So they were putting in a lot of intellectual efforts to try to integrate Islam into the Chinese intellectual scene. On the other hand, given all of that, it is also surprising indeed that Chinese Muslims did not translate the whole Quran into Chinese. After the 1st century under the Ming Dynasty, as China turned more inward and adopted more of an isolationist foreign policy, Muslims learned to maintain their stability by being quiet and not bothering their Chinese neighbors. So they pretty much kept them to themselves, even though there was greater integration through marriage. There was some kind of effort in intellectual discussion, but by and large, there were no complete translation of the book, the text, the Quran, no full translation of the Hadith. So as a result, the larger population in China were still quite ignorant about Islam because Muslims, kept to themselves mostly, and there were not a lot of kind of outside preaching or discussions. This helped reduce any potential friction with the authorities or with the larger Chinese population, but it could also cost them, that this lack of public outreach to the larger society could really cost them. And this really became reality in the next dynasty, which is also China's very last dynasty, the Qin Dynasty, which was established by the Manchus. The Manchus were an ethnic minority group from Manchuria, which is in northeast China. Being an ethnic minority themselves, the Manchus were quite sensitive to ethnic relations, ethnic antagonism, particularly that between the Manchus and the majority Han. But they also had a powerful interest in discouraging widespread unofficial organizations within its frontiers. And Islam, with its seemingly outlandish secret text, which is mostly in a foreign language, and unconventional mosque-based community structure, appeared heterodox and even subversive to some Qing officials. The Qing had discriminatory policies against the Muslims, prohibiting halal slaughtering and banning the construction of new mosques, and banning the pilgrimage to Mecca. In the 19th century, there were a lot of rebellions in China, some of which were led by Muslims. For example, the Yaqub Bek's rebellion in Xinjiang, which is in the northwest, and the Pasay rebellion in Yunnan in the southwest. Those rebellions were brutally suppressed. Many lives were lost in the process. Many Muslims were banished or exiled in really barren and horrible locations. There were massacres of the Muslims in this chaos and fighting. So it's okay to say really that the suppression and massacres in the Qin Dynasty left a deep scar on the psyche of the Chinese Muslims, from which they have not totally recovered until today. So again, many turned back to the strategy of keeping to themselves. And really their main task is to try to survive under harsh conditions. Some even refused to learn the Chinese language at all. So we know that 1911, the Qing Dynasty was overthrown. China marched into the modern age. Modernization took place. China changed from an old dynasty into a modern republic. So there was a short period of revival of Islam in the 1920s, 1930s. Muslims were active participants in many aspects of the Chinese society. For example, there were a number of important publications, magazines, journals focusing on Muslims, Chinese Muslims. And they were published in the Chinese language. The Muslims were also a formidable military force in some localities. For example, the northwestern provinces, there were Muslim warlords. There were important high-level Muslim officials in the nationalist government. So Muslims were really active. They were active in the national salvation during the Sino-Japanese War, which is a part of the Second World War. So their fate was closely connected with the larger Chinese national situation. But things changed again in the second half of the 20th century. So that's actually the next part that I'm moving to. That is to look at Muslims today and their challenges and a couple of my suggestions. So these are some census data from an earlier census, national census. As you can see, there are about 10 Muslim ethnic minority groups. You might have heard a lot about the Uyghurs recently, but the Uyghurs are not really the biggest Muslim group in China. The biggest is the Hui ethnic minority nationality. But if you look at the numbers, you notice that altogether, numbers might have changed within the past 10 years or so. And it's also hard to get accurate numbers anyway. But if you look at the total here, really the Muslim population is a small percentage of the Chinese population. It is no more than 2%. It is indeed a minority population in terms of percentage. So to know about the current situation of Chinese Muslims is really to look at different stories. Since you've heard a lot about the Uyghurs, I'm going to focus more on the Hui today. what I'm going to say, my main point is that in the 20th century, Chinese Muslims went through a process of ethnicization, which brought them some benefits, but it also caused some problems in the long run. So the Hui, the Chinese character listed here, means to return. People have interpreted that differently. Some say that it means return to where we came from, which is, the Lord who created us. Some say that it reflected the fact that many early Muslims in China were foreigners who were expected to return or who longed for returning to their original places. So the term Hui initially was mainly a religious term. It's not really an ethnic term. So when we mention Hui, the first thing came to our mind in history was that they referred to a group that was loosely connected through a religion. And there were other different terms referring to the different small segments of the population. For example, the Uyghurs in southern Xinjiang were often referred to as the Chantou Hui, meaning turban-wearing Muslims. And the Muslims in northeastern Tibet were often called the Salah Hui because, again, they spoke a kind of a Turkish-based language. Hui or Hui often refer to the largely Chinese-speaking Muslims in China. So initially, Hui or Hui was mainly a religious term. But this term became more and more ethnicized in the next decades, particularly in the 1950s, when the government organized a large ethnic identification project. Basically, the government sent a large number of anthropologists, social scientists to China's frontier regions to try to identify the multiple ethnic groups. So there were over 400 different groups, but eventually the government recognized only 56, one of which was majority Han. The other 55 were the ethnic minorities. How did they identify people, right? They really used Stalin's 4 common standards. If a group has a common language, common territory, common economic life, common culture, then they can be identified as a distinct ethnic group. In reality, though, this is a very messy, quite arbitrary process. People from different groups were lumped together into one. And people who had some kind of commonality were divided into different groups. So it's really a messy process. But what matters for us today is that during this process, 10 Muslim ethnic minority groups were identified. The biggest, again, is the Hui, and then the Uyghurs, and then a number of other smaller Muslim groups. So I'm going to speed up a little bit because I realize time just flies. This is a map of the Hui Muslims in China. So every black dot here, every small black dot on this map represents 3,000 Hui Muslims. As you can see, the Hui are quite scattered. There were a few more concentrated areas, but you can find them, almost anywhere. So the Hui Muslims were scattered in China. They did not really have their own distinct territory, nor did they have their own distinct language because they speak Chinese. They also do not look very different from the majority Han Chinese. Here is a map of major provinces that have large Muslim populations. Here is Ningxia, is Gansu province. In Xinjiang, more Uyghurs. There were also Hui and other ethnic minorities living in Xinjiang. in Yunnan in the southwest. But there are also large communities in other places, many other places. So when kind of integration or indigenization did happen, we actually see very creative things, very interesting things. The halal in Arabic had a Chinese term that is 清真, which basically means pure and true. So in many Chinese restaurants, you see not only the Arabic halal sign, but also you see the Chinese characters 清真. In China, even though Muslims are not a big group, they have developed different sects. There is the Qadim, there was the Sufi-oriented groups. There were more kind of, some of them were more traditionalist, some of them were more kind of reformists. So it's a pretty complicated picture. You know, at one point, people identified over 40 different groups, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. So we see a lot of kind of mixing between the Islamic elements and Chinese elements, which created beautiful things. For example, this is the famous mosque in Beijing, the new Jie Mosque. Look at the architecture. It's both traditionally Chinese, but with Islamic elements. Beautiful, but with large Arabic signs here. So this is the prayer hall, the main prayer hall. It's still standing in Beijing. And calligraphy. Right? So these are Arabic calligraphy, but they were written on the traditional Chinese scrolls. So beautiful. You know, they look like just pictures. Again, so when we were able to really combine different things, we can create really, really beautiful things. Different styles of mosques. Some are more kind of Middle Eastern type, but some really combines different elements. So due to time, I'm going to be very brief about the Uyghurs. They are the second largest Muslim group. Many of them live in China's northwestern province of Xinjiang, which became a province in China in the year of 1884. In order to kind of integrate Xinjiang and Uyghurs more into the Chinese system, over the decades, the government had encouraged a lot of Han Chinese migration to this region. Xinjiang is very rich in oil and other natural resources. Due to their location, which is at a border region next to countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan, the government had security concerns, so they felt a need to closely monitor what was happening there. So what you might not realize was that in the early 2000s, the US war on terror really had deep repercussions for the Uyghurs in China. You know, previously the Chinese government were worried about, you know, security, about any separatist tendencies. And now following the US war on terror rhetoric, they had a new thing to worry about, terrorism, right? So all of those could be used to carry out policies that can be really, really controversial. So again, due to time, I'm going to be really, I realize my time is really up. I'm going to to wrap up my discussion today by pointing out two things. One is the need for integration vis-a-vis the official assimilist policy. In more current years, the Chinese government had adopted more of an assimilationist policy. They're trying to de-Islamicize the Chinese Muslims. They ordered the Arabic halal signs to be removed from restaurants. In some cases, they asked the round domes of mosques to be removed to make them look less foreign. So here is a line here, right? Muslims would like to keep their religious practice, be able to worship, but there was resistance towards total assimilation. On the other hand, there was the need to further integrate into the Chinese society, right? And history told us that the more Muslims participated in the larger Chinese society, the better they were in terms of stability, right? So these are two different approaches, and I think we need to bear the history and this in mind as we move forward. Another thing, my last point that I want to point out today, is really a unfortunate thing. What I see as a intellectual poverty among not just Chinese Muslims, but Muslims in other communities around the world. I think a lot of us were quite satisfied that we have the Quran and we have Hadith, and those are, great sources of wisdom and guidance. And many of us kind of stopped here, and we did not go a step further to try to explain to people, what this means for a modern life. How should a young person, a Muslim in China, interact with the larger non-Muslim population? How should a young Muslim in the US interact in a Western context? So I think there is a lot of work we need to do to really make Islam relatable to contemporary life, especially for the young generation. And I think that in the past, at least that's the case among Muslims in China, we have very often focused on the small things. Okay, what is halal? Is the meat halal? What should I wear? Right? Really on the small things, but we forget the bigger and more important things. That is, we need to build up the heart. If the heart is not there, all the others are not really important, right? We need to be able to have meaningful dialogues with non-Muslim groups, explain who we are, explain what they believe, right? We need to read books. We need to better educate ourselves so that we can even participate in the larger public intellectual discussions and in the discourse. Otherwise, if we are just kind of self-satisfied and not read, not educate ourselves, we will not have the opportunity to let ourselves be better understood. We will not have any position in the larger intellectual debate. Unfortunately, I think that's something we are very lacking. And under that context, I think some of the things that some Chinese Muslims are doing is really meaningful. For example, in my time, there are a group of Chinese Muslims, either from the Han or from the Hui or from any other group. They tried to translate Islamic texts and scholarship into the Chinese language so that the larger Chinese population and society better understand the Muslims. But this is very hard work, and they don't have a lot of support. A lot of these people are self-supporting. They have to try to make a living, which could be very time-consuming, and then try to do something to promote cultural dialogue. Those are some of the books that have been published, all in Chinese language. So you can find them in bookstores. You can find them on Amazon or other online places. And this is really, really meaningful because it really helps the non-Muslim Han Chinese population to understand Islam and Muslims, to try to bridge the gap between the small percentage of Muslim population and the larger society. And I think those are really meaningful things. And I would like to see that in the near future, there would be a kind of almost like a renaissance in the Muslim world, that we really prioritize building the heart, improving our mind, so that we can be better understood by other people in various contexts. So I think I'm going to end here. I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Sister Zhihong Cheng, for this wonderful lecture, and together with your personal experience and your candid suggestion and advice to how to empower Muslim communities in China and beyond. Myself included, and all my colleagues, and I'm sure the audience of this lecture today also benefits from your knowledge and your insight. So we have a few questions from our audience and our colleagues. One thing you mentioned is this, you give a very excellent presentation about history of Chinese Muslims. And if we can learn from history, and about Muslims' history in China, and either for Chinese Muslim situation today, or for Muslims in other part of the world, like in the West, in America, in the US, in Africa, or everywhere. And so what can we learn? What are the lessons, what are the wisdoms we should learn, and what are the pitfalls we should avoid in order to improve the situation of the Muslim today? So what Chinese history of Muslims tells us?
Yeah, this is a very important and a very big question. I think we need to show our common humanity. And Muslims are first and most humans. And we have connections with other humans, whatever traditions or value systems they are from. And history really shows us that the more we open ourselves up, the more we see more of the commonality between people, the more we are able to have dialogue with other people, the more we are able to do things together with other people, really the better understood we are. And if you look at history, the Tang Dynasty, Song Dynasty, Yuan Dynasty, those are all pretty cosmopolitan dynasties, and the Muslims were actively participating. They were a constructive, positive force in the society, and they were respected for that. They prospered because of that. So I really think that we need to see, we need to step out of our little cocoon and try to learn what other people are doing and what can we learn from them, without abandoning our basic principles. Islam, some people have said that Islam is kind of like a river, right? It appears in different colors depending on the riverbed, right? That's the case. Islam is a very humane, and it's also, very flexible religion, right? That's why it was able to spread to so many different parts of the world, despite the difference in cultures and contexts. And I think we need to really keep that in mind. First and foremost, be a respectful human being. And be able to work with other people, no matter where you are. And people really learn about the religion very often through examples. If we are, on one hand, talking about the religion in beautiful words, but our behaviors don't match, that's going to be a big problem. That will really put people off. I hope that kind of addresses the question.
Yes, very much so. Second question is from another audience. This fine line between assimilation and integration. As you may know, the World Muslim Community Council, this organization which hosting this lecture today, is an international organization which promote integration and advance the welfare of Muslim communities, especially Muslim in those non-Islamic countries like China, to help them and to empower them to, encourage them to integrate and in a meaningful way, so that they become part of the larger host society they are, and so improve their social, economic, and cultural status. But on the other hand, there's this concern of assimilation, which if you integrate too much, as me use, or you some scholars has been warned that, if you integrate too much, you will, in Chinese they call it Hanhua, become Chinese, that you lost your Muslim identity or Muslim principles. So in particular with Chinese experience, both history and today, what advice or what we should do, in terms of this? Who should decide this line? I mean, how to do it, intellectually or culturally or politically?
Yeah, that's another very good question. Indeed, it's really a fine line between integration and assimilation. I think one difference here is whether the process, whatever process it is voluntary or involuntary or forced, right? Integration should come from voluntary, should be voluntary, right? That I want to be better understood. I want to be a bigger part of where I live. So I want to learn about not just myself, but other people and their perspectives. But assimilation is very often more kind of top-down and forced, right? So that's something to bear in mind. As to how to go about this, there is no easy answer. But I think one old Chinese saying has wisdom, that is, if the whole bird nest is broken, how could you keep the eggs intact, right? 覆巢之下岂有完卵, right? So always remember that Muslims are a part of a larger society. We are not outside of it. We are always a part of it. Whatever happens in the larger society impacts the smaller community, right? So in that sense, in order to earn respect, we have to respect others first. Or simultaneously, we need to respect others. We cannot demand other people to respect our differences while we don't do the same, right? So I would say that Muslims really, we need to have self-strengthening, strengthen ourselves in multiple aspects, have our scholars who can stand up and have dialogues with other people, have our lawyers, have our entrepreneurs, people who can play important roles in different aspects of society, and really focus not on the small differences, right? If somebody accidentally said something wrong, let's not jump up and condemn that person. It might because ignorance. And in terms of ignorance, we ourselves also have responsibility, right? We have a responsibility to make ourselves understandable, right? So I think one can earn respect by really being a positive, contributing factor in a society, and then in the process be patient, tolerate small frictions, and really focus not on the small differences, but more on the common goals and larger things. And Muslims are supposed to be people who bring peace, right? It's from the Quran, right? Even when other people insult us, we are supposed to say Salamu alaikum, right? We are supposed to be mediators. We are supposed to be peace breakers. We are supposed to be bridge builders. Let's go back to that spirit. I think it will take time. It will take time for Muslims to be respected and earn the respect. That needs hard work. Focus on the long-term goal instead of kind of short, immediate happening.
Thank you so much. I hope all those my colleagues and our audience have heard from you this candid advice, how we can, go over these challenges and earn respect as you suggested and hoped. Let's be patient, inshallah, we can get there. Last question is, you mentioned this, the important intellectual work done by Imam Ibrahim. He translated many classic Islamic texts into Chinese, and as you show in the picture, and I think it's so much very important intellectual contribution, not only to the Muslim communities in China, but also to the Chinese society. As you and many Chinese will studied in universities and came from this educational system of China, we often feel that not much literature and good literature in particular about Islam, how compared to other religions, like Buddhism, Christianity, and other religions. So it is, in fact, a good, very large addition to the discourse and the literature on Islam. What would be the, how this book can be like this movement started by Imam Khan can be enlarged or have much more impact? What kind of resources you will need, or what kind of a method you should take, or what kind of support or awareness we should create? Like, what are the ways to, because I see this is a good one, and but we want this good one to be much more powerful and much more impactful. How should we do that, if you have any suggestions?
Yeah. This is not a one-person thing, right? One person has limited time, limited energy. There needs to be a community, a larger community of Muslims who realize the importance of bridging the gap and of improving the intellectual profile of Islam in a Chinese context, right? So more people need to work on this together with coordinated efforts so that we don't waste energy on doing the same thing, translating the same book, right? Another thing is that it's really sad that we, a Muslim community, sometimes really impoverish our own scholars. I thought of the early 20th century Chinese scholar who set himself in translating the Quran into the Chinese language. That needs a lot of time, right? And he was in poverty. His family was in poverty. Not many people knew what he was doing or realized the importance. Fortunately, he got some kind of financial support from a friend who really, paid for his room and boarding so that he could concentrate on his work. But he's doing great work, but he really needed more support. And the young scholars, well, some of them are not really young anymore. People who grown up in the 1980s, 1990s, and today, life is not easy for them, right? They have to make a living, and that could occupy the majority of a person's time. But if they had some kind of support so that they can focus themselves on the work that they do, that will really speed up the work that they are doing. Another thing that I want to say is that despite all the hard work that some, Chinese-speaking Chinese Muslims are doing, there are also weaknesses in what they are doing. That is because we are so short of our own scholars in the Chinese context. Right now, we are focusing more on translating instead of writing our own works, right? We are in a way borrowing other people's ideas by translating, but we don't have enough work. We don't have a group of works that are created by our own scholars in the Chinese language. That's something that we badly need in the coming years. So I would say that I personally think that, if you have the money, if you have the resources, instead of investing that in building another mosque, I think if I had the money, I would invest that in scholars. I would give them support so that they can do what they wanted to do. And that's more long-term. And whatever knowledge that was produced in the process will benefit multiple generations. Any house, eventually, they are material things, but building the heart is really a long-term thing and very, very meaningful.
Well said. I think we do need to invest and support our scholars and intellectuals who would promote Islamic culture and to interpret Muslim literature to the outside world, and so that Muslim will earn more respect. In fact, the World Muslim Community Council is one of the pioneer organizations I see, which are dedicated to promoting intellectual discourse, education, and good governance among all the Muslim communities. I think your advice and your sharing would definitely be paid attention by the World Muslim and the World Muslim Community Council, and which can help to encourage and to inspire more support and help for the scholars in China and elsewhere. So with this last hope and the last commitment, we successfully conclude this lecture. And we thank Dr. Zhihong Chen for this wonderful sharing and insight. And we hope to see you in the future on our platforms and to have you to share more about this.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you.